Welcome to the Internet History Podcast. I'm your host, Brian McCullough. Joel Johnson has spent nearly his entire professional career working in digital media. He went from being an anonymous online commenter to becoming an early editor of Gizmodo to eventually becoming editorial director of all of Gawker Media. Essentially, Joel was there from the very beginning when blogging began to go pro, as it were, and eventually evolve into the modern media landscape that we know today. In this episode, Joel recounts the history of blogging as a quote-unquote industry, Gawker Media especially, and gives us his own perspective on where digital media has been and where it might be going. Joel and I were introduced around the time he was launching The Nightlight, which we discuss later in this episode, and so we've known each other, at least tangentially, for a couple of years. But right before I hit record, we discovered that we were both born on exactly the same day of the same month of the same year. So as you'll hear in media res, we begin this episode by trading similar life experiences coming of age with computers in the 1980s and 1990s. Please enjoy Joel Johnson.
Was one of the first ones that I actually saw in the theater, because I remember I didn't see, I don't think I saw Raiders or like Jedi was the first one that I remember the experience, but somehow I think I must have seen the two previous ones because I knew what was going on.
I think I saw Muppets in Manhattan or something before that, but right, because you remember the speeder through the trees scene.
Right, I remember. Yeah. I mean, there's so much shit. The funniest part of all of that from that set of pop culture was about, I don't know, it was probably 8 or 9 years ago now, and I was sitting at home one day, and I was like, I think I'm gonna watch Aliens again. And I turned on Aliens, and I knew every single line of Aliens, but I realized I'd never actually seen it. Yeah. My whole life, I'd just been steeped in what Aliens was, who the characters were, what all their catchphrases were, and then, but I just realized I've never actually seen this, and it was the weirdest psychedelic experience because it was I know this, but I also know that all of these images are, when moving, are new to me.
Embarrassingly, I've seen Aliens 1,000 times. I've never seen Alien
all
the way through. I mean, I've seen bits and pieces, but I probably have that same experience. Well, I know what's coming now, even though I haven't seen it. But we're already started. So, cool. Joel Johnson, thanks for coming on the Internet History Podcast. We just discovered that you and I were born on the same day.
It's true, we're blood brothers.
Exactly.
Except with time.
Well, Aquarian blood brothers. But so actually that'll help me lead into, we must have a similar computing history background.
Could be.
Were you a Mac kid or PC all the way?
Absolutely not a Mac kid.
Right,
Hated Macs.
Neither was I.
Was very vehemently a PC kid.
Because of the games.
Because of the games. My first machines, my grandfather made accessories for TRS-80s, for the Radio Shack Tandy home computers. So those were the very first machines I ever used, and he had everything. He had TRS Model 1, 2, 3, 4, the portable, whatever. So I was very into those, but I was probably a little bit young, except to just punch in a few lines of code that he would tell me to do. And the games were terrible. Right. And then I remember getting our first. We got a 286 PC clone that was I kept that well into the almost in, I guess Pentium was my next one after that. So I kept that one for probably 4 years, and that was Wing Commander and Doom and all of these original, and tons of BBS time and calling into all sorts of places. So Yeah, hardcore PC kid for sure.
And then I've said this before on the show, but then it gets reinforced every time you go to Babbage's, and there's one tiny little shelf for Mac games, and the whole rest of the store is PC games. So
I worked in a software etc. when I was about 18, and Kirk Hammett, the guitarist for Metallica, came in, and I was like, hell yes, like Metallica, like he's coming into my store, and like this is a totally small store, nobody was ever in it, and he walked up and he was like, do you have any games for Mac? And I was like, oh man, Metallica's fallen. Like I thought they were cool, but now I'm not sure anymore.
Which was Mist and a couple other things.
Yeah, no, I couldn't help him.
So you mentioned BBSs too. So was that your first online experience stuff, or was there?
I remember my stepfather was very like kind of technical nerdy guy too, and he wrote a war dialer when we lived in Springfield, Missouri. And that was my first experience with anything even vaguely illicit, hacky.
Explain a war dialer.
Right. So back in the day, the only way that you could get onto BBSs, which were bulletin board systems that you used analog to digital modems to contact, you would just have to know what the phone number was. You're just calling one computer with a phone number is calling another computer with a phone number. And a lot of times back in the day, you didn't know what that list of phone numbers were. You didn't know which computers were attached to where. There was really very few directory services. And if there were, they were literally text files that just said, here's a number, here's a number. So what you could do is you could write a script. And I think this was just like a batch file, like a DOS batch file, that would walk down and call every single number in order, and then see if it got a modem handshake or not. And if it did, it would put a little X next to it and say, yep, that sounds like a modem to me. And so you leave that running for a few days, and then you'll have a good set within your, not the area code, but whatever the next three, I can't remember what those are called, but you could run through that 10,000 numbers and you would have a good sense of like, okay, these are maybe bulletin boards that I can call into. And then you go back and you dial into each one, and a lot of times you would just get that like one prompt that you would get a protocol handshake, and you would get a prompt and you're like, okay, what is this? It's not a public BBS. Like, how do I get into this? And sit there and type passwords all day and try to hack into something, hack in big air quotes. But yeah, war dialing was back in the first few years of it. That was a lot of times how I had found the initial bulletin boards that I hung out on.
This is a nerd shot in the dark, but Trade Wars?
Oh, hell yeah, Trade Wars. Yeah, I lost a summer to Trade Wars.
So did I. Many summers, yeah.
I have a very distinct memory. It probably was about 11 or 12 where I had spent probably 2 or 3 months playing Trade Wars on this BBS, on a one-line BBS where only one computer could connect to it at a time. And I even went to other people's houses and drug my giant PC with me so that I could call from their phone lines to the BBS to get another account, because it always did like a callback to authorize or to verify that one account, one person. So I had this like 10-person group team in Trade Wars that was all me, that I would just dial in sequence and log in with the new account. And I spent 2 or 3 months doing that, and then this one dick came in one night and blew up my whole system and all of my fighters and everything that I had. And I remember walking into our backyard under a starry sky and just crying, just bawling. It's like, I don't know what to do.
I spent a whole summer building up a thing where we my friends and I double crossed a guy.
Oh, nice.
Somehow we convinced him we were on the same team, we were working together, and then we went in one night and changed whatever so that the photon cannons would shoot at his ship when he came in. Because it was one of those dead end systems
where you hide your planet.
Where you hide your planet, right?
The Trade Wars 2002. I feel like it gets some credit. It was maybe a proportionate amount of credit, but it's totally the proto Eve. It was the very same kind of space trade malicious game like Eve. And then it also had, and I think it was in the 2002 version, which did not come out in 2002. That was a futuristic date when they made it. The 2002 version had a bunch of ANSI graphics that maybe only 8 or 9 pages of it, when you logged into a space station or whatever. And I remember that being actually very influential too, because I was always fascinated with computer graphics, and just even seeing that kind of high quality ANSI art that could come down a modem pipe, I always thought that was super, super cool.
So what about getting into online communities, like when the web comes around towards the end of high school?
So, BBSs were definitely the beginning of it. Talked to a few people here and there. Never was I think I had an email account that did some relays out to the actual internet, but I honestly didn't understand what the internet was for a long time. A long time after I'd even been on the internet.
Do you know, I found the way I discovered it was there was a special edition of the Utney Reader.
Okay.
Where they literally had an issue where they were like, this is what the internet is, and it broke down news groups and IRC and stuff like that, and the web was just beginning then. So then it was the first thing that listed websites.
Yeah, I didn't understand I didn't understand how to put this. Technically it made sense. But when I first discovered the internet was, sometime in the early 90s. And there was already enough hyperbolic writing about it that as a kid, it really confused the hell out of me about what it actually was. Because you would read things. It was right around the time that Wired was starting to come out. I didn't think I knew Mondo at the time because it wasn't sold at my local gas station, but Wired was. And you read all these heady West Coast, it's going to change this and it's going to change that. And at a time where I'm also learning about drugs and girls and all of these other things, it really took me, honestly, probably a year of messing around on the internet for it to even click where it's oh, this is just a computer network. I know what networks are. And I mean, it's just one of those weird blind spots you have when you're a kid where you look back on it now and it's so obvious what it was, but because it was written in this pretentious tone, you're I must not be understanding all of this. It seems like it's just computers talking to each other, but somebody told me it's going to change the world and I don't get it. So yeah, that was my first experience, was BBSs. And then I actually took a quick detour into Prodigy, which was the dial-up, kind of bullet. It was AOL competitor at the time.
That was my main one too. You and I are crazy.
Yeah, we're really lined up.
I did Star Trek role-playing games on the Prodigy message boards.
I was part of a Wing Commander role-playing group in their message boards that had all these really weird rules, and you had to I think you only had so many posts that you could write at a certain amount of time. And Prodigy was a really cool technology because it was all vector graphic based and had a lot of potential. But again, it was one of those things that I think was kind of ruined by the fact that the content was bad. And a lot of those first internet portals or even captive portals that they were trying to simulate the greater internet experience, the content was always so safe and so boring and generic that it wasn't compelling.
I don't know if you are aware of this, but then they ran into, I remember when everyone fled Prodigy for AOL, was one of the main things was they started charging 25 cents an email.
Right.
But then also there was this period of time where they were trying to police content, even the email back and forth between users.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Right. And so I've read internal Prodigy people accounts of that's insane. Why were we trying to, But it was that sort of attitude, whereas AOL, once it starts to take off, you can go in a chat room and do crazy, dirty sex chat all the time, and they don't give a shit.
Yeah.
So that was basically...
The only other memory I have of Prodigy, which I spent maybe a good year on that, and was certainly my first kind of online community thing, I got a free t-shirt for signing up for Prodigy that was just this thin white cotton t-shirt that had the Prodigy logo on it, which was just the word Prodigy with a star. And I was a precocious little twat growing up, and I wore that to school in 7th grade every other day.
Yeah.
And all these kids would be like, "Oh, you think you're so smart, huh?" And I'd be like, "No, you think you're so smart. This is actually a computer network that's the name. Just the fact that I'm also a Prodigy is a coincidence." And it's which is why it explains a lot of why 7th and 8th grade were really terrible because I was such a little jerk.
Well, what I'm feeling my way towards here is I feel especially, I'm going to use a crazy term, but the first generation of people to become professional bloggers, of which you're in this cohort. I feel you came up organically through web communities and so what was the thing that started to get you to be a commenter and be all right, I'm living my life online?
So, not to give you my whole life story, but just for context,
please.
through all my teen years, was a typical 90s dork, liked Dungeons and Dragons and Japanese race cars and, all that kind of normal stuff. But I thought my whole life, literally my whole life since I was conscious, I had been told by people in my family and also, anybody around me that I was going to go, quote, into computers, right? So my whole life, because I was always on my computer, I was always playing video games or doing something with it. And so in my life, I dropped out of high school when I was sophomore year or something like that. And in the back of my head, I'm always like, oh, well, it doesn't matter because I'm going to be into computers. I'm going to be a computer programmer of some stripe. And I'm gonna do all of this stuff. Well, lo and behold, I'm not a very good computer programmer. I don't like the work that much at all. And found out, and you and I being literally the same age, we are in a really weird age where we were graduating high school or first entering the workforce right when the first internet bubble was collapsing. So I had all these friends and people that I'd made online who worked in the Valley, worked all around for the telcos and the Bell system companies, doing Unix work and all this stuff. And I was just like, oh, that's what I'm going to do too. And then the day that I went out to go start trying to find those jobs, the entire market collapsed for 2 years.
I think I've told this story on the show before. I remember coming up to New York for the first time, and a bunch of friends working for .com era. Webstakes was one, whatever. And them literally saying to me, you're too late.
Yeah.
They just told us last week we have to be profitable, and that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
The jig is up, essentially. Yeah.
And so, in my teenage years, or late teens, early 20s, I'm like, well, I missed it. And, I got a job as a network administrator for a while and ran some websites on Windows boxes, and it was terrible. I hated it. And so, I ended up moving to New York in 2003, I think.
Why?
Because I wanted to get out of Kansas City. It was a real sleepy town, and I always loved New York. I had a lot of friends here, and just typical New York reasons. I want to try it. But I moved here under the anticipation that I was going to go to art school and that I was going to be some sort of artist. But in that interregnum between realizing that, wait, I'm not going to step into a $100,000 a year job building HTML websites into moving to New York. I had spent tons of time online in largely gaming communities. Something Awful was actually had come out of Kansas City, which I was never a big Something Awful guy, but it was in the periphery. We had started a website called CaseyGeek.com, which was supposed to be just kind of a forum news site, which was actually a proto blog that we did news and roundups and all of that stuff. As soon as anybody else, we were definitely in the mix, or could have been if we would have known what we were doing. And so when I got to
stuck with it.
Yeah, we did stick with it for a while. I think the reason that didn't work is because at the time, all of those roundup sites, there was one called Blues News for PC gaming that I remember. There were certain sites that were very compelling to me to visit because I was, from a certain point, and continued to be addicted to the internet, right? And so that experience of having a site to check every 10 minutes or every 30 minutes or every hour that had a little new nugget of news for the children listening, that was a really odd, rare thing. In the early days of the internet, people were building archives. They were building pages that would last forever. Here is my collected wisdom, and this is my page about model trains, and here's everything I know about model trains done. Nobody was going, this is my model news or model train news page where every day I'm going to collect
this is for today,
aggregate all this
moment.
Content. Right. So we were one of the first, and it came out of the kind of PC gaming, online gaming world, but we were, and not that big and not that influential, I don't want to overstate it, but we kind of sensed that there was something there, but we didn't have the audience, and we certainly didn't know how to monetize it.
Right. But we might come back to this point, but I think the early days of blogging, more than almost anything else I've seen, where if you were just there first and planted your flag and stuck with it,
Mm-hmm.
eventually within like 5 years, you were like an old hand and you had the audience. So we might come back to that idea.
Well, and there's something, there's a you know, a progression here, whether it sounds like it or not. So I had come to New York, was doing all this like stuff, and I was doing like Photoshop work in the fashion industry, and just real low level stuff. And Gizmodo had already launched, and Gizmodo I know had launched before I even moved to New York, because I remember reading it probably at least a year before I moved to New York. And Gizmodo was very compelling to me because it was a gadget site, which, you know, at the time didn't exist. It was very underserved as far as finding that stuff. And then the format was relatively new as well. And so I found Nick Denton's instant message handle, his AOL handle, and like IM'd him and was like, hey, like, you don't know me from Adam, really like this Gizmodo site, why don't you have one for video games? And he was like, why are you IMing me? You know, but also was fairly receptive and was like, you know, send me an email with like what your experience is, where you come from. Well, you know, that's where my online gaming internet, like something awful forum troll background intersected with what was happening in media at the time, which was this rise of blogging. And so, you know, it turns out that I was a subject matter expert about all of this stuff that actually there weren't that many people that could string a sentence together knew about. And so I ended up, the progression is not that interesting, but he basically was like, yeah, we want to do a video game site someday. We're not sure when. Thanks for writing. And then literally like a week later, Pete Rojas quit and he was in a lurch and he was like, do you know anything about gadgets? And I was like, you bet. I sure do.
Yeah.
Like, meanwhile, I have like no idea what the difference between CDMA and TDA is and all of this stuff, but I knew I could fake it.
You're doing that wrong.
I'm putting on it. We're in a cold ass room in this meeting room, and I got to put on a sweater because I'm old.
But as a good host, I provided you with a
You
jacket.
did with only a certain amount of dog and cat hair all over
Right,
it,
yeah.
but it's fine, keeps it warmer. So you know, it was a real out of nowhere thing, and I actually think what you said earlier is right. Where, and if you picked a topic and you created a schedule that people could rely on, and you did it every day, like it would show up. People would show up. And you know, my initial experiences at Gizmodo, I'd written a lot of stuff online. It was kind of mostly just forum posts and jokey things, but I knew how to write, and I'm not dumb. Like, I have basic grammar in place and all of that stuff. And you know, come to find out, as long as I was putting the content up every day, it kind of didn't matter what I wrote. And you know, I grew Gizmodo to be way, way bigger than it had ever been when Pete had done it. But Pete also went and started Engadget, and it was growing at the same rate, if not faster, at the same time. So it's like I added some new elements in the fact that like I added jokes and was like treating. I took the tone in a different direction than anybody had ever done before. But mostly, I think I was really successful at that because I was there and I did the work and I showed up, and like anybody else could have done that work if they were still covering gadgets, which turns out is like one of the most popular things for nerds to read about on the internet.
All right, I'm gonna have you stop, and we're gonna back up and hit a couple points here. I'm not asking you to give me the origin story of Gawker, but from what you understand, from what I've read, it almost seems like that Nick was gonna do technology, like Kinja was gonna be a technology company, and then the idea to do Gawker and start these blogs sort of was an accidental secondary thing?
I mean, I think the easiest way to describe it is that the core business was going to be Kinja, which was essentially a web-based RSS reader.
Or sort of like a scraper also, maybe, like to bring in content?
It had other parts. Yeah, okay, I don't know exactly, because it had changed, you know, over its lifetime. But at the beginning of essentially Nick had the, I think, right idea to say, okay, all this blog stuff is happening. Movable type is filling the internet up with RSS feeds. There's not one good RSS reader that's easy for people to use and has like nice sharing tools and all of this stuff. I'll create Kinja. And then the sites the brands that came out of that, Gizmodo, then Gawker, and I can't remember what was third. I think those were almost like proof of concepts that blogs could make money. You know, because if you're going to create a business around aggregating blog content, you kind of need to get a bunch of people creating blog content. So if you create one or two yourself and figure out like how the advertising will work on there, normalize the form, then more people will be likely to, you know, create content that you can use in your readers.
Sort of just dogfooding the medium itself. Yeah.
And so, you know, what happened in reality is over the course of a couple of years, Kinja took forever to come together and launch, which, you know, probably is if my experience is any guide, is because, you know, Nick is a terrible product manager. And also in the interim, like Gizmodo and Gawker and a lot of these sites started to get some traction. I remember like maybe 2 or 3 weeks after I started, we'd gotten the first Microsoft ad on the site. And then I put up or I linked to some weird German bicycle that had a dildo that like came through the seat. And, you know, I didn't even embed it on the site. I was just like, not safe for work, but if you want to see this crazy thing, like here it is. And Microsoft immediately like pulled all of their advertising, was like, oh, well, you know, we can't be associated with any of this stuff. But while that was happening, you know, we just kept growing and growing and growing. And a year later, like I'm interviewing Bill Gates. Like that, there was just a time there where people went, what are blogs? Wait, I love blogs. Wait, maybe this is the hot new thing. And over the course of really just, a couple of years, it just went from nothing into this giant, well, relatively giant thing.
We're going to return to that idea actually. But you mentioned, you know, the idea that gadget blogging seems to be one of the more evergreen, more popular niches for this sort of thing. Do you know the origin story of, you know, saying, okay, let's try a gadget blog?
I mean, I don't know how apocryphal or true this is, but Nick always explained Gizmodo as being a clone of the Wanted section inside of the front of book section inside of Wired magazine.
Okay, yeah.
And then they just made that. And instead of having all of the think pieces and everything else with it, it was just like, it's a catalog. It's like, here's the thing, here's what you need to know about it. Maybe it's some news that's like, here's a firmware update or whatever. There were some antecedents of that. Obviously, Mossberg had, although he was more like a column, but you know, he was at least talking about personal technology. There's a guy that doesn't get nearly enough credit, in my opinion, named Lloyd Case, who used to work for PC Magazine, was kind of floated around within the Ziff Davis world, did a site called Extreme Tech a few years later. But Lloyd was a baby when or he was a kid when I was a baby. But I remember reading PC magazines because the big boring PC magazines would have a little one-pager from Lloyd Case that would be, here's all the gadgets. And then, you know, sometimes those gadgets would be like an amazing plug-in SCSI card or whatever. But, you know, even as a kid, I was always like, I don't care about, you know, AS400s and, you know, how to optimize your tape storage on mainframes. Like, I care about PCs. I care about things that Sony makes that are like cool little gadgets. And I care, like, that's what because that's the stuff that's accessible to me. Like, I can actually get it. So I think Nick's idea, or maybe Pete's idea, I don't know, was like, we'll just take that little piece of it out. And then that ended up setting up a template for a lot of the enthusiast and product blogs that we did afterwards. Like I did go on to, I wasn't the first editor, but I hired the first editors for like Kotaku and all of that stuff.
Which is a video game blog.
Blog. And so like as we went forward, it was already set in place of kind of like what a news blog is. And the reason gadget blogs have remained evergreen is so obvious. And now that like I've come through the other side and I consider myself pretty well versed in media and the media business and all of that stuff, technology blogs do well because there are still a shitload of nerds on the internet, and there are still tons of tech companies that have advertising dollars that want to get to those nerds. So the funniest thing about tech blogging is that it kind of, I don't think it really killed a lot of the tech magazines or publications. Like I feel like that was more just a symptom of the internet at large. But it just took the core of the advertising dollars, like the really easy, sweet money, out of that and just drew a tap right out of that into operations that maybe only took 2 or 3 people to run. And that's why you still have any sort of, they go out to start the Ringer, which is the, a new...
Bill Simmons.
Yeah, like I don't know what to call it though. It's like publication.
Right.
And it's like, and they're like, oh, and by the way, we're doing technology content too. And whatever, I'm sure it's fine. Like I'm not dissing the quality of the content, but from a business perspective, it's because that is always the number one most lucrative pipeline of advertising dollars is technology stuff. Like automotive is like kind of a close second depending on where you're at, but and so it just worked. And turns out there was like a huge audience for it. We were doubling our traffic like every month or every 2 months, like just tons
All right,
of
I
people
promise we're going to get to how you turned it into the greatest gadget blog of all time. But that
is how I describe it.
We alighted over, I just want to hit this story a little bit. You reach out to Nick Denton, you say, why don't you do a video game blog?
Right.
At some point, Pete steps down or is fired or whatever, leaves.
I mean, I think he stepped down because he didn't own as much of Gizmodo as he wanted, and so Calacanis was like, promised him the world with the Svengali touch that Calacanis has.
So what's the story in between here? Had you stayed in touch with Denton?
No, but that window was only like literally a week, maybe a week and a half.
So basically just
some random ass kid said, I know how to write on the internet. Mr. Fancy media guy who lives in New York and has a British accent and has published a book was like, that's great, kid, like, buzz off. And then a week and a half later finds himself in a lurch where he's like, oh shit, I got to find somebody to run this website because my guy left.
Right.
And for the first 3 months, every week or every 2 weeks, they would be like, yeah, this is going to be your last week. Like we've got somebody lined up.
So you were literally just triage, a warm body brought in.
Just to keep the heartbeat going, just to write anything.
All right, let's think of this from your angle though. How do you know how to, like you step in, you start to do this,
So I had technically like blogged before, even though we didn't call it blogging, I didn't know what it was. So I knew how to like be pithy and write little short pieces.
You knew the voice and like the kind of the...
Well, and the voice, I'll tell you, the voice, I 100% started by stealing the voice of Old Man Murray, which was a video game website, the first kind of humorous video game website, and still a huge influence to me. One of the writers, they both work at Valve now, but Eric Wolpaw went on to, and Chet as well, his partner, did a lot of the writing in Portal. Like incredibly funny, incredibly like kind of the first meta writers that I had experienced in a lot of this enthusiast stuff. But nobody was doing that in tech. That was all like a gaming culture thing. And so for the first few months, for sure, I just stole that form and that sense of humor and applied it to technology because it worked. And then there are 2 other people that actually really helped me out. There was a guy named Brendan Kerner, who is still a writer, still doing some really awesome books and reporting, who was in Nick's friend and whatever. And he kind of had given me some good advice about a lot of stuff and was holding my hand through it. And then on a daily basis, Corey Sika was at Gawker.com, and Corey, God bless him, was the supportive mothering figure that I needed when Denton was constantly going we're going to replace you any moment now, don't get too comfortable. And Corey was like, here's what adverbs are, here's how to make this better.
Corey seems to have played that role for a lot of people.
Oh yeah, for sure. Corey was the daddy for a lot of us. I shouldn't say it like that, all creepy. Corey was the very sexy daddy for all of us. He was very influential and very generous, and Corey's brilliant. He's can be when he wants to get off his ass, be a genius. But I think as important or more important is he's just incredibly generous and real and a great editor and really good on feedback. But he isn't out there to try to one up you on your writing. And so he was, and we only. Honestly, he only kind of mentored me or whatever for the first couple of weeks just to make sure I wasn't going to go off the rails and, start putting up Mein Kampf post or whatever.
So, okay, but we're reading between the lines by the omissions here. So are you ever, even when it becomes official, you're on board, do you ever get like, okay, this is what we're about, this is the angle we're taking, this is our voice, this is our mission statement? Are you ever given anything like this is what we do?
No, not really. I mean, Denton would occasionally like show up on Instant Messenger and be like, I like this, I don't like that. But I mean, let's to be clear, in those first few months before I actually got hired, to take over full time, like Denton hated what I was writing because he didn't like the sense of humor. He's never had the same sense of humor that I have. He thought all the jokes were weird. He had all of his stuffy dipshit friends were like, what is going on? Like, and the monocles are popping out and they're like, this person put a dick joke in my Palm Trio post. Like, how could this possibly work? And so, Nick, of course, is like very susceptible to people, saying like, worrying about things. And honestly, if it wasn't for Corey going like, it's fine. Like, these are funny. I'm laughing at these. I get what you're doing. Like, just go with it. I probably would have, I keep trying to say anodized, but I don't know if that works for anodyne. But I would have stripped a lot of the humor out of what I had done. But by the time it came on, or that I came on full time, I just kind of had to figure it out. And I was spending my entire life working on that website. Like, I literally woke up at 6 a.m. or 5:30 a.m. so that I could get a post up. I was living in a loft in Dumbo, actually literally like 3 buildings away from where we're at now. And I would wake up, I would start typing, whether I knew what I was saying or not, and just start making content. And I would do that until I went to sleep, and I would usually go to sleep at like midnight or 1 o'clock. And I did that for about a year completely by myself.
Okay, do you have marching orders in terms of you have to hit a certain number of posts per day?
No, but I always completely eclipsed whatever post count that you would get. When I first started, I think we got paid $12 a post. Actually, I think when I started, we got paid $8 a post. But I was doing, I think on average, probably about 25 posts a day, and some days like 30 or 40 posts a day. It was just constant. And to be clear, like a post sometimes might only be like 3 or 4 sentences.
And a link or something.
And a photo and whatever. But and I had a machine, right? Like I go into Photoshop, crop my image, put my stuff up, like do half the time I wouldn't even proofread it. I would proofread it after I hit save because movable type-in was really iffy about actually working. And so a lot of times I just wanted to make sure that it got saved and published before I even worried about typos or anything. And I was just going for speed. And then at the same time, Pete had started in Gadget with a budget and a staff. And I think they had like 4 or 5 guys like working on all of this stuff. And I kept saying to Denton, like, I think I need help. Like I was like not able to sleep at night and my body hurt. And like I was like my neck, it was the first time in my life I ever had like neck and spine problems because I was just so hunched up the whole time. But I loved it, and it was so awesome to get like emails from people that are like, I love your writing, like this is great. Like I got a lot of adoration for work that I had, I guess everybody craves, but I didn't know how much I had craved it. So it was best of times, worst of times, but there was not a lot of direction. The direction was just go, like just get everything.
Because this is also before they start paying attention to like page views and like, well, that this post got this amount of attention and that.
Yeah, there wasn't that much granularity on a per post or subject matter basis. I think the only editorial feedback I ever got consistently from Nick was like, we need more of those very interesting Akihabara Japanese only gadgets. And it's like, well, I can't make more of those exist. Like I'm like, I promise you, every time something weird comes out from a Japanese company, like I'm on it.
Fly me to Japan and maybe I can find something.
Right, which actually did end up happening a few years later, and I finally went to Akihabara the first time and was like, this is very culturally interesting, but there's not a lot of cool gadgets here. This is, that moment is gone. But yeah, I did that. I just went constantly, didn't have any vacation. I just like ran that whole stupid website, and we didn't worry about page views or subject tuning or any of that stuff because we were growing so fast that, I mean, I remember the first time we had 100,000 uniques in a month, and it was like a big deal because I don't know, because there were other things like Instapundit, and there were some other sites that were other bloggers that were fairly big, but I would argue that, or I wouldn't be surprised, I would say, if Gizmodo and Gadget, especially in that period of time, whatever it would have been, 2005, 2006.
Yeah, we haven't even framed that.
Right. Yeah, I think actually it was probably more like 2004, 2005, something like that. We could have been the biggest blogs that existed as far as things that are blogs, not necessarily biggest online publications.
At that point, what was the biggest in the Gawker stable?
I mean, Gizmodo became the biggest very quickly.
Okay.
While I was there, but again, I think that was more of a timing thing. Like, I mean, Pete and I, just to put it all out on the table, like Pete and I have never liked each other and never really gotten along. But like, I have also been a real dick to him in the past about being like, well, you started it, but I perfected it. And it's like, yeah, well, maybe, but I also now see, I still did it.
Right.
Maybe that's true. I mean, whatever. I'm a funnier writer than Pete and always have been, but Pete got in there before I did and was aware of the opportunity for it and also made a lot more money off of the whole endeavor than I ever did. So good on you.
Well, then this is the opportunity now. So when you start to get this competition in the space, you know, when he launches and they have more money and they have more people and it's just you. So describe for me that sort of thing, and then take us to how you triumphed.
Oh, did I triumph? let's set this story up for a happy ending. I just went nuts for about a year and a half. Didn't take any time off. Eventually, I got a couple of interns that I don't even think were paid interns, that some of them did better than others.
Does Engadget try to do something different than what you're doing, or are you guys just hitting the same?
You know, they were more professional in tone. They ended up doing a lot more stuff. They were also kind of more plugged into the PR world sooner than I was. I definitely came from a hyper skeptical sort of screw the media, screw, you know, all of this big system man kind of vibe. And so when PR people started reaching out to me, of course, my first instinct is to like clown them or make fun of them or, you know, whatever. And I think Pete and company were a lot smarter about building those relationships. Also, Calacanis during a lot of this time, you know, was feuding with Nick, doing everything he could do to take down Nick, including like trying to call me a sellout and besmirch my name in public and private and all of this stuff. And so, I mean, it was super stressful at the time. I look back at it now and I'm like, it was kind of awesome because I was just thrust into the middle of this New York media,
it's a good
online world.
Media war, you know? Like,
yeah, which I had no framework at all. And also really felt like, okay, this .com era stuff that I missed when I was 18, now that I'm 26 or whatever, I ignore the dates, but like now that I'm in my mid-20s, I'm in the middle of all this stuff. And I remember I started getting like TV hits for news stories and, you know, would be on national television and stuff. And all of my friends were like, what is going on? Like, what is this job you have? Like, it seemed like some little dumb thing. And that all was like within a year and a half period. But I went on vacation. Lockhart had come on, Lockhart Steel had come on, I remember. And I was and even in that year and a half period of time, I remember going from like a per post thing to I think maybe salaried, or at least there was a bonus system in place. Like I was making pretty good money by the time it was all done. But I finally got a chance to go on a vacation, and I remember I went scuba diving somewhere in the Bahamas, and I came back. I was there for like maybe 2 days out of a week-long trip, and I just like kind of collapsed mentally. I was like, I had a panic attack. I was like, I can't go back and do this. Like, I can't do it. I've like been insane for a year and a half. I can't go back to it. And so I went back to New York and set Lockhart and Nick down and was just like, look, I can't do it. I can't be the only person that runs this thing. It's just too much. It's making me insane. And you know, they were pretty generous about it, and like I helped them find a replacement, and that was that. That was kind of the end of that era. And then I don't even know what I did after that. I don't know if that was when I was going to go start Dethroner or whatever.
Did you go to Wired maybe immediately after that?
I think that is what happened. I think I went to, no, that might have. So if I sound confused, the reason I'm confused is that I've worked at Gawker, or had worked at Gawker 4 separate times, I think.
Right.
Something like that.
We're going to get into that because that's common with everybody, the going and the
coming back.
The burning out and then the coming back even after. Yeah.
So, but that timeline, I'm sure about it, because I just remember it being so, I mean, you can tell, like, you guys can't see because this is a podcast, but I'm like hunched over and tensed up here and now just like talking about it again, because it was a great experience, but also like just physically and mentally exhausting. And another piece that I had kind of forgotten about, but is also true, is that was a lead up to one of my first really big ego lessons, which was after a year and a half there, I thought I was some sort of superstar. Like, because every day I'm getting emails from people that are like, I love your content. Like, when are you going to go start your own thing? Man, this is great. Like, oh, this is the best tech website that's ever existed. It's so funny and it's so smart and we're doing all this stuff. So after a year and a half, I'm like, well, you know, I've gotten what I can get out of Gawker. Like, it's time for me to go on and become this, you know, what, I don't know what I thought I was going to be, but some famous writer or something. And I remember after I had quit Gizmodo the first time, like going out there trying to get work. And I got work. Like, I mean, it definitely gave me a career in the media, and I was doing some magazine pieces and things like that. But I was instantly forgotten by the audience, like all of that stuff, which I'm not, even at the time, I wasn't like, I was upset by it, but I didn't feel like it was unfair. It was just a really good lesson of like, hey, you got too big for your britches. Like, you're now not, like, the work was important. What you created was important. That's what people loved. Like, yeah, maybe a few people here and there loved you and appreciated what you did specifically, but never think that just because you're part of something that you created that people love, that love gets to transfer with you when you go on to do your next thing. You have to rebuild that every time.
So is that the lesson of Dethroner, essentially?
I mean, Dethroner actually did fairly well for what it was. So Dethroner was a site that I had created that was essentially a Gawker-style site, but it was going to be about men's stuff, like whatever that would be, fashion, and specifically trying not to do tech though. Like, it was like outdoor gear, just all the other stuff I was interested in that at the time I couldn't really write about on Gizmodo. And you know, because I did come out of Gizmodo at the time was when John Battelle was starting Federated Media. And so, you know, he got down on all fours and blew as much smoke up my ass as he could, as my ass could take, which is a lot apparently. And you know, was like, this is going to be huge. Like, this is going to be a big thing. We're gonna, you know, you should expect X amount of dollars a month in revenue. We've already got advertisers lined up. And it was this big golden moment for a lot of us who had worked for other people but not created our own brands. We're like, okay, well, finally I can create my own thing that'll be a business I can own and I can go with. So a couple of things ended up killing Dethroner that weren't my fault, and then a couple of things that were my fault. Like, the first problem was that ego thing that it was like, I thought that I'd have 100,000, 200,000 people just come on board. Joel Johnson started a new website. Like, of course I got to read it. It's not how it works. Like, people that loved the stuff I did writing about gadgets didn't necessarily want to hear me writing about like suits or, you know, whatever mid 2000s douchebaggery that I was into. And then I also, and we were talking about this probably before we were recording, like it was the first time I'd ever hired somebody personally for one of my businesses. And I hired a good friend who was a great guy, and he actually did really good work, but it was a wrong decision at the wrong time. I was trying to grow too quickly, and when you're operating out of your own saved money, I didn't have anybody investing in me or anything like that. It just went like it was the dumbest thing I could have done, because all of a sudden, instead of being able to turn down my expenses to almost zero and just muscle up and get all of the writing done myself. Now I have somebody who's relying on me every month for a few $1,000s, and that meant I got to pay him first before I pay me, and handle all this other stuff. That was a big mistake I made. The other part of it too is I think I had worked so hard for like a year and a half building Gizmodo, and I thought I had it in me to do it again, and I didn't. Like, I still was trying to like live a balanced life while starting to Throner and going like, well, I'm only going to write 5 posts a day, and then I'm going to take a walk and hang out with my dog and all of this stuff, trying to protect my mental health, which was a reasonable ask, but not where you need to be to start a business, and not where you need to be to like really struggle past all the initial pitfalls. And so, that was a mistake. The things that weren't my fault were basically that Federated Media turned out to be like a huge cluster. I don't know which words we could say on here, but like it was a mess. And John Battelle really, I think, messed up a lot of people's businesses by promising way too much and then hiring a sales staff that was very rapacious and green and would often promise advertisers that you would do things that you wouldn't. And it was a much more sensitive time. I think a lot of people don't realize how much this has changed in the last decade, but even having advertisers on a blog at all a decade ago was a big, like, people were like, you're a sellout. Like, you can't, how can we trust what you say when you have like an ad on your website?
Right, so to frame it, you launched Throner in 2006, so it's exactly a decade ago.
Yeah. And like, at the same time, we had Federated Media sales guys who were going to like, I remember Mini was one of the first ones that was going to be a pretty big ad by the car company. And they were like, we want you to do like a advertisement about what you love about Mini or whatever. And I was like, well, I'm happy to write about like, I was like, I'm not going to write, I'll write ad copy if that's what you want me to do that I think will be appropriate for my audience. I'm not going to write something from my voice that says why I love Mini, because I've literally never driven one. And also, by the way, I'm a car guy and I like have opinions about these things. And also think Minis are great. Like, don't have a problem with them, but I'm just not going to do this thing. And this is like literally the week that we were launching, something like that. And then I get pushback that's like, well, actually, we already promised the advertiser that you were going to do it this way. And so if you don't, like this $10,000 ad buy, which is like, of course, a tremendous amount of money to me at the time. Not now. Now that $10,000 is pocket change. But as a business, that was a lot of money for an advertising spend even then. It went away, and that ad deal went away, and then I kind of just ended up getting garbage remnant. And that's like within the first couple of weeks of launching the site. And so all of a sudden, this revenue part that I thought was just going to be taken care of by Federated Media ends up not being taken care of at all, because I'm not playing the game that everybody else is. And funnily enough, Deuce was at XOXO last year and kind of gave a presentation about some of this, where she had ridden out Federated for years and years. Right. The exact same thing had been happening right from the beginning. And like, John Battelle's shady as hell. Like, I try not to have a lot of burnt bridges. Like, I've even forgiven like Calacanis and all of that stuff, at least in my heart. Like, Calacanis doesn't care about me, I'm sure. But like, I mean, because speaking of bad people, but like, whatever, we all did a lot of fighting trying to get this stuff going. But Battelle, I think Battelle and the promises he made through Federated killed blogging as a small business for a lot of people. I think it grew a lot of small businesses too, but it was the ones that were willing to go more commercial. Now, as a complete sellout, like, I work for brands and do advertising. Like, I don't care anymore. Like, my pride is not that important. But I look back at that stuff 10 years ago. What happened to Boing Boing? What happened to all of the partners that were part of Federated? It could have been something big, and it could have been the wellspring of a ton of really good independent journalism and content and all of this stuff. But because it was a VC-backed company that needed to make money, it just instantly went into like a shady situation. And there was a couple of times in my career where working with Battelle and working with Federated was like, he lied and like made stuff up, or tried to put a lot of the blame on me or the other bloggers and creators and people that were involved. And I mean, whatever, maybe he's a great guy, like, I don't know. But my experiences with him have always been really shady. And like, I'm not out here to try to start a war or anything, but I'm just saying, like I think he talked a big game about wanting to be the kind of band manager of all of these bloggers and be this, you know, producer that would help create all this content. And I think instead he made like a half-baked company that was a real distraction for a lot of people. So anyway.
You mentioned Boing Boing. So you were a couple years at Boing Boing, so just working with them.
Yeah.
That was like some words on that.
Yeah. So Boing Boing. I still love Boing Boing. Still.
Who doesn't love Boing Boing?
Friends, if not friendly, or friendly, if not friends, with most of them.
Right.
With all of them, and like. So somewhere around the Dethroner time, once it was clear that Dethroner was flailing a little bit, and I might have gone back to Gawker for a little while. I don't know. I'm not gonna even ever remember what I've done for the last decade. But at one point, Boing Boing reached out to me and said, "Hey, we want to expand. We're finally ready to turn Boing Boing into something that's like a little more commercial." They were working with Battelle and Federated and ready to go, and so they were like, "We know you helped launch a lot of this stuff at Gawker. Like, we're thinking about maybe doing a gadget site and maybe a gaming site and some other stuff." And essentially, the idea was Boing Boing was going to try to do a vertical-based, you know, thing within the Boing Boing spirit and kind of weirder and quirkier or whatever, but do something based not unlike what Weblogs Inc. and Gawker were doing, which was a perfectly good idea, actually. They were maybe a little later than they should have been because Boing Boing used to rule the roost as far as traffic and size and all of that stuff. But you know, they were ready to go, and so they came to me, and like, it was, I think if I'd ever been starstruck by anything from the internet world, it was probably
Corey and
Corey for sure,
yeah.
Cory Doctorow for sure. But just the whole thing, like I liked all of them, but it was, maybe starstruck isn't exactly it, but it was this moment of feeling when they came to me and said, "We want you to come on board as like a writer on Boing Boing," which hadn't happened. There've been guest bloggers or whatever, but the idea that like in some ways, and there's been like a million quote fifth boingers, you know, this idea of like this person, and I would never call myself that,
yeah.
But the idea that like, okay, cool, like this thing that only 4 years ago, to me was this totally unattainable, crazy thing that I've like seen in Wired magazine, and I read it every day, and it's like, and Corey's publishing books and talking about copyright and all this stuff, and I'm like, and now they want me. And it really did feel like, and I probably have never said this to them, I might have said it to Pesco before, but it's like I felt like that was it. Like I was like, because it was less about like a job, and it was more like, I have been selected by Boing Boing to go be part of this. Like, I am good enough, and I am, you know, ready to do all this stuff. It ended up being sort of a mess for a variety of reasons, mostly that were business reasons. And there was a point, I think we did that for a couple of years, started Boing Boing Gadgets, helped get Off-World off the ground. Probably the best thing I did was hire Rob Beschizza, who I had known from a gaming forum. Hired Rob Beschizza, who remains like a dear friend and is like a huge asset to the Boingers and still works there. And yeah, it was great, but it didn't go, you know, they had approached me kind of going, "We want to do a gadget site." And I said, "I don't really want to do a gadget site, but what are you thinking?" And they were like, "Well, you know, it's more like weird stuff and strange things and fun stuff and hacky stuff. It doesn't have to be like in the race to get the news up the fastest and whatever." And so we ended up building in Boing Boing Gadgets, especially when I hired Rob and John Brownlee. Another friend, Matt Buchanan, described it as, who was a kid at Gizmodo at the time. He's like, "You guys built the perfect gadget blog for gadget bloggers." Like if you were a gadget blogger, you loved Boing Boing.
It's like
gadgets.
The comedian's comedian.
Yeah. We were totally like, you know, inside baseball, and we did some really good stuff, really creative writing, really funny, took some risk and did some thematic things that were great, and creatively it was a lot of fun. And we were even making money. Like, we weren't losing money for Boing Boing, but we weren't blowing up. And I think a lot of that is just because there was already Gizmodo and Gadget. Like,
Right,
you don't need a third Gadget site, and that's why we were trying to do something else. In retrospect, you can look at something like The Verge that came a few years later as something that stepped into a crowded space and did a really good job with it. So maybe there were other ways that we could have done it better and built a better audience. But we were all just three weirdos that were excited to essentially like be Old Man Murray reborn, because we were all huge fans of Old Man Murray, and it was fine. But there came a point, Boing Boing was in real dire financial straits because, once again, Federated Media had promised them all of this stuff that ended up not happening, and ad deals weren't closing. And at the time too, the scale was really out of whack. Like, Boing Boing was maybe doing 5 million uniques a month. Like, I'm kind of pulling that number out of my ass, but I know it was in that neighborhood. And like Gawker Media sites were doing 50 million page views a month or whatever. Which also I think is high, but nevertheless, it's like the scale of what you could get, and the way online advertising works is that you just need, like, the bigger you are, the more money you're going to make, not just because of more page views, but because you're going to be able to land bigger clients and negotiate higher CPM rates. And Boing Boing was struggling, and you had 4 adults that had families and all of this stuff who had real salaries, and there was this weird thing where some of the Federated people were just being real dumb, and I kind of threw a temper tantrum, which I probably shouldn't have thrown, and told the Federated people to go piss up a rope. And then Patel, we had like a team meeting, because it was a very huggy-feely kind of place, and Patel was like, this whole thing has been a disappointment. Like, you were hired to create a Gizmodo, and and I'm like, no, that was specifically what we said we weren't doing. Like, you're so wrong. And I walked, and I was just like, screw this is dumb. I had a little bit of equity that they gave me a little bit of money for, and I walked away. And this is a couple of times I've done this, which is not the greatest thing in the world, but where I've thrown a temper tantrum and been like, I'm out of here. And when I leave, because my salary is no longer having to be paid, it like frees up money for people to be able to go. So in that instance, I actually ended up, just for the moment, like, I think I kind of helped by leaving, because it helped remove, my salary and all the cash flow stuff around me. And then Rob took over and did the rest of it, and has had a great career there and done a lot of really good stuff. But it was heartbreaking, because it was like, I had thought that I was going to be part of that site and that group of people for like the rest of my life. And the awkwardness of how it ended, it took a few years to kind of repair some of those relationships. And I'm certainly like, I actually talk to Jenny quite a bit still, but like, I don't talk to everybody as much as I did then, which is normal and fine. But that was a tough one, because I really kind of thought like, this is where I'm going to be. Like, this is the perfect balance of being able to do what I want creatively, make money, but not have to work 18-hour days to keep it alive. And I also just circumstantially had met a girl and moved to Oregon to be with her, and thought I was going to marry her, and then that didn't work out. So I'm like sitting in a house in Eugene, Oregon, like not like without a job and no friends and just no girlfriend, and just hanging out and like trying to figure out what I was going to do. So I spent a couple months in the backyard getting drunk and hanging out with my dog, and then was like ended up kind of pointing myself back towards New York and Gawker and all of that stuff, and did another round.
So that's interesting. I can see why you would want to go back, but why can everyone always go back to Gawker? Does Nick not hold grudges?
Only certain people can go back.
Okay.
So, and the way it works is, it has nothing to do with talent, it has nothing to do with anything else. The reason I made it as long as I did in Gawker is because I always quit before I got fired. That's all it comes down to. Nick is a bad manager, and a really bad sense of talent. Like, he won't nurture anybody, right? Any of the kind of leadership and growth and the really great environment for writers that Gawker had was largely due to people like Corey and other people that over the years that created that environment for people. And so what will always happen is, if you work at Gawker, and why it made it such a terrifying place to work, is that at some point the Eye of Sauron will like point down at you and be like, why aren't you doing what this new idea? And so for a long time, for years, the way you kept alive in Gawker was that you kept your head down. And then right when it looked like Nick might decide to spend a week paying attention to what you do after he's ignored it for a year and a half, that's when you leave, right? Or you go threaten to leave, or you get another job, and then it'll be like, oh no, like we lost you. You're always welcome back. We're gonna come get you back. So that's basically what happened for me, right? It's like every time that things would, and it wasn't completely calculated because a lot of times it was wedded to me being stressed out or whatever. But the way you kept alive, and the way I kept alive, is that I would just go do something else. And it so happened that I was actually also leveling up my abilities and skills and career. Like I went to Wired for a while and helped them start their blog or expand their blog network. I had done some freelance writing and really improved my ability as a reporter and as a writer. So every time I came back, Gawker had gotten bigger and had a new set of challenges, but I had also kind of gone out and got more experience that made me more suited for that next suite of challenges. The thing that's a bummer about it is, of course, that you shouldn't have had to be playing that stupid push me, pull you kind of game with Denton about trying to always have him chasing you instead of worrying about falling out of his good graces. And then, of course, the financial and money part of things, which is like now all pretty much moot. Like I guess some people will still get a little bit of money through the bankruptcy, but there was certainly an idea there for a while that we were building a company that was going to be worth $1 billion or was going to be worth a bunch of money. And as soon as it became clear that the stock options and all of the plans for how Gawker was going to work were a complete sham and a complete shit show, that dream for a lot of people went away. And for me specifically, it freed me up to be able to quit and go try to do other things. So being always the one that would leave always meant that Nick was receptive to me coming back when he would do it. And he was the same way for other people. But what would happen that was bad is like, you would have somebody that would run a site for years, and then one day Nick would decide they weren't capable or qualified to do it. And that was it. And they would be fired with no, and I had a hand in some of that stuff too. I fired some of those people largely because, Nick told me to do it. And I was definitely his axeman for a while. And like, it sucked because you never knew when that switch was going to happen. And so I said that to people for years. It's like the best thing you can do for your career at Gawker is to go somewhere else and just get out and like be the one that got away, because you'll be able to come back again, usually with a promotion or more money. And I rode that one out until it didn't work, until I finally didn't quit soon enough and got fired instead. So,
there's one more thing I want to touch on from your time at Gawker, which is the Kinja that we know of today, the comment system or the whole software system, whatever. Because weren't you?
It's a CMS, really.
Right. Yeah. So you were around for that whole rollout and were heavily involved in that, right?
Yeah, to a certain degree. I mean,
okay.
I didn't.
So what is it? Did Denton never really give up the dream that this would be more than just a bunch of blogs? This could also be a technology company. What was the goal of Kinja and what you guys were trying to achieve?
I mean, in my most pessimistic or aggressive mode, I would say that like Kinja was supposed to be everything, and that was why it never was good at being anything. I think that the main idea that it had boiled down to is that it was going to be something along the lines of like a Medium, somewhere between Medium and Facebook, right? Mm-hmm. It's that it was a place where publishers could go to put their content with a nice CMS with decent designs and commenting systems with vetted commenters and all of this stuff. And there was a whole plan for an economy around the back of it that was going to be like ways that you could, basically an ad exchange that was built into it so that both small and large publishers could move traffic around and move money around and all this stuff. But, it never got off the drawing board or launched properly, I should say, because it was never finished, right? Like there was never a point where the idea and the design of the thing could stop
could cohere long enough to let developers build the thing, you know? And that's the thing that happened with Kinja is that Nick's hyper-reactive and waffly mind works pretty well in media because, you know, you can walk up to somebody and say, actually stop writing this kind of feature and write this kind of feature, or you should do a story about X and not Y. And it's fine, you do it, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. It's very low cost to execute and very low penalties if it doesn't succeed. It does not work in a multi-million user software platform. Like, you have to know what you're building up front, and you have to be able to build and execute a roadmap for each one of those steps as you go through. So in 2014, the year I came back as executive editor, I spent almost as much time trying to guide Kinja's development and the product development. And there were obviously the tech team and other people did the actual work. Like, I don't want to overstate, you know, what I was involved in, but a lot of what I was doing was just trying to go, okay, this vision that you have for what we can build is not a bad vision, but we can't look at what the feature set is supposed to be at the end and then pick and choose certain pieces of that and build that first. We have to build the feature set for what the audience or the customer in this case wants, which is different, and we were trying to serve them all at once, right? So it was like, one day it would be about trying to get Time Inc. to move all of their publishing over to Kinja. So we're going to promise them all of these like image features and great editing tools and collaborative editing and all of this stuff. And then the next day it would be like, but actually, who cares about publishers? Because it's really all about commenters, and amateur sleuths are going to put gossip on the internet and they're going to be rewarded for that. So you build a whole system for that. And it was just, it's like, you know, it's just like trying to walk towards a mountain, but every time you see another tree, you walk towards that tree, and then you walk to this tree over here, and there's just this zigzag back and forth. And, you know, the irony is that, like, it ended up, Kinja was not and still is not a bad CMS. It's pretty good as far as that goes. And the performance stuff for what the tech teams did with very, very limited resources, they did great work. You know, both the New York and the Hungarian tech teams, they served a lot of web pages on not a lot of hardware for a long time. And there was times where it did not work well, but towards the end, the last few years, they've really done well. But yeah, Kinja was a good idea. And like, Kinja, it was late, first of all. It was highly reacted towards Facebook. Like, Nick was so terrified of Facebook that Facebook was going to be the only arbiter of traffic, which it kind of is, but also what can you do about that? You know, you don't, it's like if you see a steamroller coming towards your house, you don't like build another steamroller. You know, you're like, the steamroller's coming, like I know what to do, like I'll try to build up a steamroller that's already much bigger and let me just get out of this metaphor as soon as I can. But, you know, the ideas were fine. Unfortunately, it got to a point where, you know, doesn't listen to people. He's not a very rational person. He's very, like, you know, whips around on a lot of these ideas. And again, editorially, that can be an asset, but on a product standpoint, it wasn't. And so he would just chew through these poor engineers and designers who would try to build out roadmaps of what we were building and come up with a product statement and all of these things and treat it like real product development. And of course, go around at every cocktail party and be like, oh, we're really more of a technology company than an editorial company. And it's like, okay, well, no, not. You don't even know what a technology company does or how it functions. I at least have an inkling of what that is, but fine. But then after a long weekend, would come back and be like, I've actually cracked the whole thing. We're going to do a totally new thing for 3 months, and then we'll launch it and it'll be half-baked and the users will revolt and none of the other publishers will like it. And then, oh, by the way, we've decided we're not going to really focus on other publishers, so all these people that we've told for months, we're going to pay them and get them in our ad network. Like, that's not happening anymore. And oh, actually, we're really only going to focus on blogging again, and we're not a technology company. And then, you know, it's like, if we would have just had a plan, which we did have a plan at one point that made a lot of sense to me, and we would have stayed on that roadmap, and if he would have gotten out of the way and just let people build out those things, it would have done okay. I still, it wouldn't have been a Facebook or whatever, but it would have been a nice publishing platform that could have answered some of the independent publishing questions that Federated had not answered back in the past. Like I was focused in the first 6 months of 2014 on trying to build a strategy around how do I get amateur bloggers enough money that they can subsidize blogging as a lifestyle. Like how do we recreate the marketplace of 2016 in a platform in 2014 to allow people to create that sort of niche content and maybe not get rich, but maybe make $60,000 or make a living wage. And by the end of 2014, we were off in a completely different direction, chasing our tails. And so the Kindle platform was not a bad idea. But there's so many lessons that could be learned for both product people and publishing people about having the greatest, shiniest idea in the world doesn't work if you're not a good project manager and manager of developers. And it certainly doesn't work. A viable business plan is not saying, we're going to do what these people over here have already done, but better. Like that's not a plan. You have to figure out, or even if that is your pole star, you have to figure out the steps that will get you there and who the audience and customer is for each one of those steps. And that never happened. And then Hulk Hogan happened and Gamergate happened, and that was that. So, and then the company is not extant in any form at this point.
Well, let's wrap up with some of these sort of larger questions, and I want to start by going back to. Everybody always talks about the voice that Gawker as a organization created. Yeah. But what you described to me was that it's not like Nick Denton comes down and says, I'm going to bring like a Fleet Street mentality and this is what Gawker Media is going to be about. So
he probably did literally say we're going to bring a Fleet Street mentality, and like most of us that worked there didn't know what that meant. So we just did whatever we were going to do.
Exactly. So in your estimation, where did that voice that people so famously ascribed to Gawker come from? Was it just from the people, just organically?
I think Liz and Corey, and like Liz's voice was not as goofy or whatever, but there was tone and choice of tone. She had a tone and she had a voice, I think but Corey obviously huge influence. And I will I'm not a very modest person, and so I don't know where my layers of false modesty are at, but the one thing that I do comfortably take credit for is bringing that voice, that funny, irreverent, trying to puncture through a lot of bullshit voice out of worlds that it had already existed. Like I certainly wasn't the one that came up with the voice, but was the first one to really bring that to tech. And whatever, if it wasn't me, it would have been somebody else. Like I don't want to overstate it, but I do think that I don't actually feel like I emulated Corey a lot so much as like Corey and I find each other funny. And he was a huge guide and mentor, like don't get me wrong, but really more as a actual professional prose writer, not like a funny blogger person. I think that's kind of where it came from. But a lot of it too was, I don't think like the Deadspin voice came from me. Like I don't think it came from Corey. But what happened was, once it was clear that having these voices or having voices was going to be okay in commercial blogging, and that we didn't have to sound like a newswire, that opened up the space for people that had their own voices to come on board and do their own thing. So I never really feel like there's a Gawker voice. I feel like all the sites and all the writers all have there's a big range of voices there, but it's the fact that we were allowed to have a voice at all is the unique part. And that part is so, like, it's not important, so I don't want to overstate it. Like, ultimately, it's not that important of a thing. But if you look at, like, headlines in the Times today, or you look at any major news organization, and the way they approach news, for better or for worse, is a lot more colloquial and a lot more chatty than it ever used to be. And I think that happens, you can go read newspapers from 100 years ago and the headlines were
chatty for their day, but what was once chatty becomes formal after generations move through it. And but we did that. Like, we were there at that time that pushed a lot of that voice through. And the fact that you could be snarky and mean, but also be talking about real and serious and important issues was like, Gawker people should all take like a big portion of the credit, if not all of it.
What about gadget blogging itself? Like, was there a golden age of gadget blogging? Like, because there was that period of time when, yes, your first smartphone could literally change your life.
Yeah.
Right? And there was that period of time when there were new gadgets and there were interesting things going on in gadgets every day, every month. Like, is that over? Was that just an accident of history? Like
I mean, no, it's not over. It's just this stuff comes in cycles and waves. I mean, I actually think we're in a minor lull right now, but all of the VR and AR stuff is super interesting. The technology continues to move along. I do think for my generation of gadget bloggers, you can look at the whole thing in two eras. There's pre-iPhone and post-iPhone. And, when I remember writing about iPhone rumors for years, because when I took over Gizmodo, people were still questioning whether the iPod was going to be a success or not. Like, I would write about iPod, and being that PC kid that was always thought Apple products were stupid, I remember getting my first iPod instead of, because I'd had MP3 players before, but I remember getting an iPod for Christmas one year, and I was like, I like this, and I think I understand why other people, like normal non-nerds, are gonna like this, and I was writing pieces like that on Gizmodo going, hey, I went out on the subway and I see all these people with white earbuds, and
I remember I was living in New York at that time, like 2003, and going back to Michigan and being like, no, listen, everybody has iPods.
And I was writing this stuff on Gizmodo, and people would write it. We didn't even have comments or anything at the time, but people would write back into me and be like, here's why the Rio or the iRiver X9 Og Vorbis player, and I was like, look, man, I think it doesn't matter. Like, I think like this thing, like this user experience thing and a branding and a coolness thing is a factor. And I only say it that way because like now we look at it as like, duh, like of course it is. Right. But like 10, 11 years ago, like that was not the case. And so, I remember putting up stories, and this is maybe more aptly than what you were asking, but I remember putting up stories towards the end of my tenure that were like, sales figures came out today that iPod has 96% of the MP3 player market, and still getting emails from people that are like, here's why the iPod sucks, the DRM, I'm all, and I was like...
Well, and that also makes me think of the era of right after the iPhone.
Right.
When it's, okay, is there going to be a phone that's going to be better than, or equal to the iPhone? So that period of time was also...
So the way those two eras pivot around the iPhone, just to get back to that, I guess, is like, you have the iPod. Everybody remained skeptical of the iPod, even while it was $1 billion business. Like, it was huge. All these like online tech nerds or whatever. And then you have all these people talking about what's smartphone and Windows CE and Palm and all this stuff that was proper to get. And we were doing like proto Wirecutter kind of stuff. And like, here's the phone we would suggest, this Nokia smartphone or whatever, and or Nokia, sorry. But at the time, the iPhone loomed as this mythical thing, and you would get occasional rumors about it, but it wasn't like, rumors weren't even a thing. And then the first iPhone kind of comes like a meteor out of the sky. Like I remember the day it happened. I actually was working for Wired when it happened, and I was at CES, not at the Apple keynote, and Denton, of all people, IM'd me, and he was like, "Do you see it? Did you see it?" And I like hadn't seen it. I was like, "What? Oh yeah, I heard they're like coming out with their phone, right? Is this happening today?" And he's like, "You have to go see it." Denton, for all his faults, like definitely has a good nose for dumb gadgets. Like he's into it, and and I remember at that point, that's when the game changed, because all of these things that we had, like a gadget blog was about, what's the best camera? Like DSLRs were getting cheap and popular. What's the best MP3 player? All these categories that, of course, were in one gadget now. So that, to a certain extent, was an end of an era, because now all of a sudden you can see it if you're smart. or just open to the obvious that like point and shoot cameras and MP3 players and portable video players and all these things that were
portable
separate categories,
GPS, yeah,
right, are all going to go into this middle section. And so then you got a few good years, a couple of years of like documenting that happening, right? Like I remember writing prognosticatey pieces right when it came out that were like they're going to put other software on this. It's going to replace GPS units and all that. You know, it's like it's stuff that is so obvious now. But at the time, people were like, "There's no way it'll ever be powerful enough," or people want a specialized gadget or whatever. So you got a couple of years after the iPhone came out of waiting for it to really become the Jesus phone that it became, and then you got a kind of sweet bit of Apple rumor thing that ultimately Gizmodo won with the iPhone 4, right. Which I had nothing to do with. Like, I don't want to take any credit. I technically was working there as an editor at large at the time, but that was all Brian Lamb and Jason Chen. And like, to me, that was kind of the end of another era where it's like a Gadget blog actually beat Apple at its own game. Yeah. And then Apple shuts them out because it was completely mishandled by.
You know what? You're so right about that. That because that was also the last time. Like, if the new iPhone design leaked today, it wouldn't be as big a deal. No. Remember what a big deal that was?
It was on national news.
Yeah.
Like it was huge. It also had a good story around it, like an engineer leaving it in a bar and all of that stuff. Which like I ended up actually talking to him in person a few years later, like just getting his story. Which super nice guy, could be a lot more bitter and is not, but still
working at Apple, right?
Still working at Apple, or was a year and a half ago or whenever it was that I talked to him. But that was kind of an end of an era too, because that actually, and this is a whole nother set of stuff that I'm honestly not the one to talk to about, but there was my era of Gizmodo and early Gawker stuff where I was writing a lot, and then after the first couple of years, I was really more editing and managing and doing a lot of other stuff. That era of Brian Lamb's murderer's row of gadget bloggers, and it was only that was only about a year and a half too. That group of people that Brian had brought in are still very influential in media in general, right? Like Frucci and John Herman, John Mahoney, Buchanan, and weirdly, like a lot of those guys, Chris Muscari, like there's so many guys that came through that organization for that couple of year period. Biddle, Sam Biddle came through there, my worst enemy, and best PlayStation friend. And weirdly, like that's actually my group of friends now. Like that group of Gizmodo people, like we all, even though we didn't really work together as much, like that was a very influential group of people too. That is super. I think it's known, but sometimes for media people, obviously media people are the only people that would actually care about this. I don't want to overstate it. But if you go look at who worked at Gizmodo in that period of time, they're still mostly all working in media and either ran or started a lot of very interesting stuff. And I feel like that was the one era of like a lot of Gawker.com writers and other website writers went on to work in other media and kind of, Gawker.com was always where the writers lived or whatever. But that era of Gizmodo, I feel like doesn't get enough appreciation that there was a hugely influential group of people that now work, at the New York Times and at eater.com. So, maybe Matt's fallen from grace, but he used to work at the New Yorker. No, his job is great now. But that was a really strong group of people that have their own fun stories and crazy things. But you'll have to get Blam or somebody else in here to talk about that.
Eventually, everybody. Yeah. All right. Very last one, because you've been super generous, and also we need to defrost.
I'm freezing.
All right. Very last one. You've literally been around through this professional blogging industry almost from the very beginning. I'm sure you can remember when getting on Dig was the big thing to go after or whatever. Now we've touched on it a bit in this age of Facebook silos of traffic and things like that. Can you still launch a successful independent blog and exist immune to the whims of Facebook changing their algorithm and things like that?
I think that the era of blogs being miniature versions of media companies and functioning that way is over. so I do a lot of strategy consulting and like PR consulting and all this stuff with my business now. That's how I make a living. And I do a lot of stuff where I actually do, I'd say at least half of the business strategy consulting I do is free, right? Because it's somebody getting off the ground, and I always say, like, when you're a millionaire, come hire me to go do something else. But it's like, I can tell you everything I know in an hour, let's just do that. But the first thing that I say to people now on any of these things, and especially publishing and online media, is like, it's like step one, where's your revenue? Like, step two, expect to take a lot longer to create content than you think it does. Step three, where's your next set of revenue? Like, and it's so funny because I can see dumb, shaggy-haired me 15 years ago saying this stuff and being like, what a sellout. But like, I don't care now. I'm like, this is how it works. Like, if you want to run a business and you want it to sustain you and to run for a long time, revenue is, I mean, this is all basic stuff, but writers don't think about this, right? So I think in this era, I think you can still do things and launch things, but I think that you have to have revenue streams that are not advertising based, or certainly not display advertising based, because one, Facebook doesn't just send and route traffic, like they also they steal traffic, right? Like, and I don't mean that they steal traffic by design, not like in a malicious way, but if you are putting your content up and you need a certain amount of people to read your site every day, because getting a hit on one story is worthless. It actually tends to cost you money as opposed to make you money. You need a consistent audience. And Facebook now has diversified or not like diluted that audience in such a way that it's really hard for you to build it, because who goes to individual websites anymore? Like,
that's almost what I'm asking. Is that over?
I think it's basically over.
Yeah.
I mean, I have had people in the last couple of years hire me or try to hire me to consult on their new media brands, and I've sat down with them, and obviously not gonna say who, but like, and I've sat down with them and been like, this is a bad business. Like my advice to you as a strategist is don't do this. Don't pay me money. Like, don't. And it's still this thing that's sounds very appealing to people, and everybody always thinks that they can come up with the better version, right? Because there's something that happens in people's heads when they read a lot of content, that they think they can make good content. And that may be true, but then you have to make that good content every day for years and build up an audience, and you can never quit. Like, you just have to go. And some of the businesses that I operate now, like the Nightlight, which is our baby gear site, was designed specifically to be a business where we didn't have to update it every day. Like, we could update our stuff every few months and make sure it was current and fresh, but it could be a guide. And that's a perfectly tidy little business, and I'm really proud of it. But the two things that I learned from that were, one, it still took 2 years and tens of thousands of dollars for me to get that thing off the ground. I only just recently came back in the black on my investment on that, because it's really hard to build an audience when you're not doing daily content, but it's really easy to blow a shitload of money if you are doing daily content. So I think if any of those plays for independent publishers are basically done. And it's not just Facebook, it's also the VC backed nature of companies like Vox and BuzzFeed, both of which I think are fine. Like,
in what way?
But, well, okay, they're sitting on piles of money.
Right.
And whether they're profitable or not, and they have tended to be profitable, they were able to reach scale without worrying about having to make quarterly revenue.
Okay.
And there's only so much audience out there. There really is. Like, granted, there's things like international and things that other people aren't into, but really there's only so many people reading things online, and then there's a smaller subset of people that are clicking ads and all of that stuff. And what happened in the BuzzFeed and Vox era is that they had a couple $100 million between them to get off the ground, and they went out and they sucked up all that traffic, and they've built good businesses around it, and like, good on them. Like, I'm not mad at them about it, but it means that for you, the individual publisher, you're actually financially almost certainly better off just going and getting a 9-to-5 job with one of those bigger publishers and just being a columnist than trying to run your own business. The only businesses Brian started Wirecutter, and Wirecutter did well, but Wirecutter is not an advertising-based business. You won't find advertising on it. It's an affiliate-based business, as is Nightlight. It's like that's specifically, I won't launch anything. I won't build any businesses that are advertising-based at this point, because I think the lesson of Facebook in the last few years, and Google obviously as well, is that advertising is fickle, and it's a bad thing to build a business on. And so if you are at scale, if you are a Condé Nast or a Hearst, you're still bleeding money. You're still probably dying, but you're dying at a slower pace. If you're Yahoo, you just went down a peg. You went from a however big $150 billion company to a $5 billion company that will be smashed in with AOL, another company that used to be big. And all of those companies, and hilariously, what those companies sell for now and have any value for is for their ad tech. It's not even for their content, right? So the advertising game is won. Google and Facebook largely won it. Apple even tried to get in on that and just bungled it. So don't be that guy that's going to go out, or woman. I mean that derisively of men, not in a positive sense. And my main advice to everybody, besides hammering in that, like, where's your revenue, is just be very Catholic about where you think your revenue can come from. And I think it's still a great time to launch a business online. I think there's plenty of opportunities that are out there. If you hustle and you work ridiculous hours and you have an unhealthy work-life balance, like, you might be able to pull it off and run that out for a few years and do it and then turn that into a business. But don't do it in publishing. Like, publishing, I think, is mostly gone, because publishing is turned into technology. And like, once a market is technology, how are you going to beat the system? And we're not even into the point where like AIs are writing a lot of the copy. I mean, obviously some of that is already happening, but what happens in 10 years from now when all those BuzzFeed videos, tasty overhead shots of how you cook something are literally just rendered on a computer algorithmically based on like what they think is a great new combination, or what keywords have shown up, or what their data they got from Whole Foods have shown,
or
them,
even
right?
on the fly based on searches.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, that's what I'm saying. It's like all of these things in the content world, and I technically have only really worked in media for a little over a decade.
Yeah.
In that decade, I have seen it go from like, I've seen whole industries collapse and fall, and it's super fascinating. But I also, as a person that is trying to create a life for me and my family, like, I'm not spending any more time in startup media publishing. Like, I still do a lot of consulting in media, and I try to help, and I think I do often help people build businesses. But again, I'll often get hired with somebody will still come to me and be like, we think we might want a gadget website. Can you help us with that? And I say to them straight up, I'll help you figure out a strategy, and it may involve like writing about technology, maybe it won't. But like, the first thing we have to do is sit down and look at your business model. Like, I refuse. Well, I don't want to be too cocky. Like, I refuse to do it. I mean, whatever. If somebody pays me, sometimes I'll just take the job. But I by and large do tell people I can't help you in a way that will be sustainable and give you success if you don't let me look at what your business model and how your revenue is going to work. Because if you're launching a website today that's based on display advertising, or even like sponsored content or any of that stuff, it may even work today for a year or two, but it's like the trend is very clear where it's going. So yeah, I mean, that's a long-winded way to say it, but no, I don't think that you can be an independent publisher. Certainly not an independent publisher that has like 6 to 12 employees. You might be able to eke out a living for yourself and have a good living. There's still the Grubers out there that are kind of chugging along, but there's never going to be a Gruber Incorporated, right? A Gruber Media, there's never going to be a Merlin Man. I don't know why I'm talking about all these Mac guys. Except I guess I'm a fan. I like these guys, and I like think they could do.
Well, like Ben Thompson would be another.
Ben Thompson is right. It's like you can still be a pundit, I guess, and figure out ways to make that work between Patreon and selling T-shirts and doing Amazon affiliates or whatever. You can cobble together a nice little business for yourself, but it doesn't scale. It's never going to be something that's going to get you to a point where you can have a dozen people. And the people that do it,
I mean, God bless them, they're still out there, but it's the Atlas Obscuras and the places that kind of find a niche that makes a lot of sense, often take a little bit of investment to give them a runway to build up their audience to get to a certain scale. But I'm not sure the days of having 50,000 readers a month and that's your living were ever real. I think they were only just these little peaks of foam in the static that would occasionally come through. But the idea of it is the idea of like the solo blogger out there making the money is not very viable, and certainly not if you're not willing to be highly adaptable. You know, you can be a Casey Neistat who will, like, you know, he's my age or older, and you know, is still out there like, oh, Snapchat, okay, I'll just start making my content there, and like that's how he builds his business. But that's how you have to do it. You have to move around to where the audience du jour is. I don't know. I feel like I could talk about that a lot more, but I don't know how useful that is.
You said my age, but you're forgetting it's literally our age.
Oh, right.
So
well, I don't want to make you feel old.
Let's wrap this up. I could personally vouch for Nightlight as a
Nightlight's great. I'm super proud of it. Like,
do you want to plug the consultancy? Or are you not ready to?
Yeah. So first of all, the Nightlight.
Right. .com. Sorry.
No. I'm just getting the
URL. A wire
get
cutter.
It right. It's a baby website. It's super important to get everything right.
Like Wirecutter, but for baby shit.
Yeah. Not nearly as I would say in depth as far as the amount of work we do per guide, but we only have like 30 some odd guides. But I love the Nightlight, and the Nightlight. I honestly probably the most fully realized thing I've ever done, and it also I thought was going to be a lot more successful than it is. But we've gotten it to a point where everybody that reads it loves it. I feel really confident in the content that's up there. I think we have the best baby content for you know, baby gear, strollers, like all that kind of stuff. And it's self-sustaining now, which is awesome. So even though I'm not on an island, on a private island somewhere.
You're not surfing every day.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, whatever. Mm-hmm. It's a good site. So thenightlight.com, check it out. Like, if you have a baby and need to buy some stuff for the baby, we will give you a lot to think about at the very least. And then, the pan company for all of the other work and people that work with me is called Special Circumstances. We're at scircumstances.com. Probably a very confusing name, but that's what I'm working with. We're a strategy and consulting group. It's I'm in on everything. It's definitely largely me, but we have a few people that we work with on different projects and that I bring in, and it's going really well. Like, it's really, really awesome. So we've got some big Fortune 10 companies that I'm working with, and we've got some startups, and we've got some real world like makerspace stuff that is still happening, and it's honestly great. Like, it's going really, really well. And as I was talking to you about earlier before we started recording, now I'm in a point where I'm trying to use all of these things I learned over the last decade about building a business and expanding, and all of this advice I give to other people about how to build these businesses, to do that with Special Circumstances, where I can build a company that does the work that I want to see exist in the world, and support other people and have other employees and have a real kind of familial company without making those decisions too quickly and running it into the ground. So it's been, we're already ahead of where I thought we would be, and we already have bigger clients than I ever thought that we would have at this point. But I'm still trying to be very cautious and step by step and go through. However, funnily enough, when you do business that isn't online internet media business, it's often a lot easier because there's more money out there, and it's not as hard to make your bills. So so if you're looking for advice or PR consulting or business strategy, or very soon vehicles, which is actually the other random part of this business that we're going to start trying to do late this year, come check us out. But that's a brand that's really, I mean, that brand exists because you need a brand and you need to be a company to be real. But you can also hit me up.
I was going to say, just look for Joel.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I don't want to be, I don't know how to calibrate how much cockiness and artifice to talk about when you're trying to
promote a business like this, because we actually, it's not a brand that's designed to like be known by everybody. It's supposed to be a word of mouth brand. And I do have now at my disposal tons of really smart people and have spun up pretty big teams to go work on projects. But at the end of the day, you're still going to be coming to me. So, yeah.
So you heard it here. Find Joel Johnson, because to paraphrase Paul F. Tompkins, he is, as always, the best. Thanks, Joel.
All right. Thanks for having me.
If this is the first time you're listening to this podcast, please subscribe to us on your podcast app of choice. There's plenty more great internet history where that came from. And if you're a longtime listener, then you know what to do to help us out. Rate and review us on iTunes. Because iTunes gives credit to reviews and ratings, and the more great reviews we get, the more people will discover us. As always, there's more info on our website, www.internethistorypodcast.com. The show's Twitter handle is @NetHistoryPod, and my personal Twitter is @BrianMCC. Thanks for listening.